What do you do when you see 4.5 over 4? Or 3 1/3 over 4? I'm the Classical Nerd, and today we're talking about fractions in time signatures. Now, I've covered irrational time signatures before, but staking a fraction in a time signature doesn't make it necessarily irrational. I mean, sure, if you think of a time signature as a fraction, but it's not really a fraction, it's just an expression of beats. How many, and then what they are. Fractional time signatures may be seen dotted throughout the 20th century as composers sought for new ways to spice up their rhythmic language. You see this in 5/8 and 7/4 and 10/8 and 11/8 and 2 + 3 + 2 + 2 and all sorts of wild and wacky stuff, and occasionally you even get a fraction. Charles Ives didn't use many time signatures at all in his magnum opus, the Concord Sonata, but he does use a fractional time signature in the middle section of the third movement, the Alcotts. He uses a bar of 4.5 over 4. When you look at this, you might be tempted to say, well, there are 9/8 notes here, so this is just 9/8. But it's not. 9/8 implies 3 beats, and each beat being broken down into 3 divisions. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3. But 4.5 over 4 has an entirely different metric structure. You can figure this out by the beaming of the 8th notes, where 9/8 has a very distinctive pattern, but also through the musical context. But what about thirds? These aren't as common, but occasionally you're going to run into a few examples, so let's look at a few. This is from the unknown impressionist Florent Schmidt in his Ombres, Opus 64, in the first movement. We see 3 1/3 over 4 and 2 2/3 over 4. These third relationships work by breaking the measure down into triplets. So for instance, the first 2 beats in that 2 2/3 measure work as essentially a 6/8 bar. The 2/3 simply means 2/3 of a triplet, basically 2 8th notes played as triplets rather than straight 8th notes. In fact, the little 1 above it points us to the lower margin of the score, which explains just that, albeit in French. 3 1/3 is thus a little bit easier to digest given this information. All but one of the triplets is unmarked, but the bar only makes sense in this way. It makes more sense with a time signature fraction instead of, say, 10/8. Because they're triplet subdivisions, treating them as if they're not would mean that you have to apply a new tempo to that bar only. That or take advantage of something later to be known as metric modulation, but that is a whole different can of worms. Because he's doing it just for a single bar, the fraction really works as the most elegant solution. Fractional time signatures only make sense for very specific contexts, but when they crop up, it's important to know how they differ from non-fractional time signatures and how that affects the music.